The morning Arthur Quinn pulled the woman from the Snake River was the morning his entire world changed, though he did not know it yet as he spurred his horse toward the desperate splashing near the riverbank. Arthur had been checking fence lines on his sprawling Montana ranch when he heard the scream, a sound so raw and terrified it cut through the morning air like a knife. Without hesitation, he urged his stallion toward the sound, his heart hammering in his chest as he cleared the ridge and spotted her. A woman in a dark traveling dress being swept downstream by the swollen spring current. Her arms flailed desperately, her head disappearing beneath the churning water before surfacing again. He did not think. Arthur kicked out of his stirrups and hit the water running, the icy shock of snowmelt stealing his breath as he dove into the current. The river fought him with every stroke, pulling at his clothes and boots, trying to drag him under with the same merciless force that had claimed the woman. But Arthur had grown up on these lands, had swum in this river since he was old enough to walk, and he knew its moods and temperaments better than he knew most people. His fingers closed around fabric, then an arm, and he wrapped his other arm around her waist, pulling her tight against his chest. She was barely conscious, coughing and choking on the water she had swallowed. Arthur kicked hard for the shore, angling downstream where the current would help rather than hinder, searching for the shallow sandbar he remembered from childhood explorations. His boots finally found purchase on the rocky bottom, and he hauled them both onto the bank, laying her down on the grass as she coughed violently, expelling river water from her lungs. Arthur dropped to his knees beside her, water streaming from his clothes and hair, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough. "You are safe. Just breathe." She rolled onto her side, her body racked with coughing, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck. When the coughing finally subsided, she looked up at him with the most striking green eyes Arthur had ever seen. Even bloodshot and filled with tears, they held a depth that made his breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with his exertion. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse and broken. "I thought I was going to die." "What in blazes were you doing out here?" Arthur asked, then softened his tone when he saw her flinch. "I mean, are you hurt? Can you stand?" She tried to push herself up, but her arms shook with exhaustion and cold. Arthur slipped an arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight as she sat up. This close, he could see she was probably in her early 20s, with fine features and hands that, despite their current state, suggested she was not accustomed to hard labor. "My wagon," she said, turning to look back at the river. "The wheel broke on the crossing. My horse panicked and ran off. I tried to grab the reins and fell in." She shuddered, whether from cold or the memory Arthur could not tell. "We need to get you warm," he said, looking around. His horse stood nearby, grazing calmly as if his owner had not just nearly drowned. "My ranch is about 2 miles east. Can you ride?" She nodded, though Arthur could see the tremor in her jaw as her body began to shake in earnest. He whistled for his horse, and the big bay gelding trotted over obediently. Arthur mounted first, then reached down and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, and he could feel her shivering against his back. The ride to the Quinn ranch seemed to take forever. Arthur pushed the horse as fast as he dared, conscious of the woman's weakened state and the way her grip around him loosened periodically. Each time, he would reach back to steady her, making sure she did not slip from the saddle. His ranch house finally came into view, a sturdy 2-story structure he had built with his own hands over the past 5 years. It was not fancy, but it was solid and warm, with a good stone fireplace and windows that let in the Montana sunshine. Arthur had lived alone since his parents died 3 years ago, his father from consumption and his mother from a broken heart, not 6 months later. He dismounted and lifted the woman down, noting how light she felt in his arms. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that worried him. He carried her inside and set her in the chair nearest the fireplace, which thankfully still held embers from his morning fire. He quickly added kindling and logs, coaxing the flames back to life. "I need to get you out of those wet clothes," Arthur said, then felt heat rise in his face at how that sounded. "I mean, I will get you something dry to wear. You will catch your death in those." She nodded, still shaking too hard to speak. Arthur hurried to his bedroom and pulled out one of his flannel shirts and a pair of trousers that would be far too big for her, but at least they would be dry. He also grabbed several thick wool blankets from the chest at the foot of his bed. When he returned to the main room, he handed her the clothes and pointed to the small room off the kitchen that served as a pantry. "You can change in there. I will turn my back." "Thank you," she whispered, taking the clothes with trembling hands. While she changed, Arthur busied himself putting on a pot of coffee and checking his shelves for something to make her eat. Hot food and drink would help restore her faster than anything else. He settled on making a simple stew from the venison he had hanging in the cold cellar, along with potatoes and carrots from his winter stores. She emerged a few minutes later, swimming in his clothes, the shirt hanging nearly to her knees and the trousers rolled up multiple times at the ankles. Despite her disheveled state, Arthur found himself thinking she was beautiful. He quickly busied himself with the stew pot to hide his thoughts. "Sit by the fire," he said. "I have coffee brewing and food cooking. You should be feeling better soon." She lowered herself into the chair and wrapped the blankets around her shoulders. "I do not even know your name," she said. "You saved my life, and I do not know what to call you." "Arthur Quinn," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "This is my ranch. I run cattle mostly, some horses." "Deanna Oaks," she replied. "I was traveling to Challies to meet my brother. He has a claim up in the mountains, been asking me to come help him for months." "Challies is another 30 miles north," Arthur said, frowning. "You were on foot." "No, I had a wagon and horse." "I told you the wheel broke at the river crossing." She pulled the blankets tighter. "Everything I own was in that wagon." Arthur stirred the stew, thinking, "The river will carry most of it downstream. Some might wash up on the banks, but by the time we could search, it will be scattered over miles. If your horse ran off, it might come back to the crossing looking for you, or it might be halfway to Idaho by now." Deanna closed her eyes, and Arthur saw a tear slip down her cheek. "I saved for 2 years to make this trip. Everything I had was in that wagon. Clothes, books, my mother's jewelry, all of it gone." "I am sorry," Arthur said, and he meant it. He knew what loss felt like, how it could hollow you out until you felt like an empty shell. "But possessions can be replaced. Your life cannot. You were lucky I was checking fence lines this morning." "Lucky," she repeated, opening her eyes to look at him. "Yes, I suppose I was." "Or you were unlucky to be burdened with a stranger who has nothing left but the clothes on her back, which are not even her clothes." "I have never considered helping someone a burden," Arthur said firmly. "You will stay here until you are recovered and we figure out how to get you to your brother. That is all there is to it." Deanna studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. "You are very kind, Mr. Quinn." "Just Arthur is fine," he said, feeling awkward under her scrutiny. He was not used to having anyone around, let alone a beautiful woman who looked at him like he was something special. Most folks in the territory knew him as the quiet rancher who kept to himself, who preferred the company of his horses and cattle to people. The coffee finished brewing and Arthur poured 2 cups, handing one to Deanna. She wrapped her hands around the warm tin cup and inhaled the steam gratefully. "This smells wonderful." "It is just coffee," Arthur said, but he felt pleased nonetheless. "The stew will be ready soon." "Nothing fancy. but it will warm you up from the inside." They sat in companionable silence for a while, Diana warming herself by the fire while Arthur tended to the cooking. He found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the way the firelight played across her features, the soft sound of her breathing. It had been so long since he had shared his space with anyone that even these simple domestic tasks felt charged with significance. "How long have you been alone out here?" Diana asked suddenly. Arthur considered lying, making it sound less pathetic, but something about her direct gaze made him want to be honest. 3 years since my mother died. My father went 6 months before her. Before that, it was the three of us running the ranch together." "I am sorry for your loss," Diana said softly. "It must be difficult, managing everything alone." "I manage," Arthur said, more curtly than he intended. He softened his tone. "I have good neighbors who help during roundup and branding, and I prefer my own company most days." "Most days?" Diana asked, and there was something almost teasing in her voice despite her exhaustion. Arthur felt his ears burn. "Well, I reckon having someone to talk to now and then would not be the worst thing in the world." Diana smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her whole face and made Arthur's heart do an odd little flip in his chest. He turned back to the stew, stirring it more vigorously than necessary. By the time the food was ready, Diana had stopped shivering and some color had returned to her cheeks. Arthur served generous portions into 2 bowls and handed her one along with a spoon. She ate like she was starving, which she probably was given her ordeal. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "I had no idea I was so hungry." "Nearly drowning will do that to a person," Arthur said. "Your body needs fuel to recover." They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need filling with meaningless chatter. Arthur found himself relaxing in a way he had not in years. There was something about Diana that put him at ease, even as she also made him nervous in a way he could not quite articulate. When they finished eating, Diana set down her bowl and looked at Arthur seriously. "I need to send word to my brother. He will be expecting me, and when I do not arrive, he will worry." "Challies has a telegraph office," Arthur said. "I can ride into town tomorrow and send a message for you. Let him know you are safe and will arrive when you are able." "I hate to impose on you further," Diana began, but Arthur cut her off. "You are not imposing. You are recovering from a near-death experience. Your brother would want you to take the time you need to get well before traveling again." He paused. "Besides, we need to see about getting you some proper clothes and supplies. You cannot very well arrive at your brother's claim wearing my shirt and trousers." Diana looked down at herself and laughed, a musical sound that filled the usually quiet house with warmth. "No, I suppose not. Though they are quite comfortable if far too large. I will go into town tomorrow," Arthur decided. "Challies is not much, but there is a general store that should have what you need. You can give me your measurements and tell me what to purchase. You would do that for me?" Diana asked, her eyes wide. "Of course," Arthur said, confused by her surprise. "What else would I do? Let you go naked?" Diana laughed again, and this time Arthur joined her, the absurdity of the situation suddenly striking him. Here he was, a lonely rancher who barely spoke to anyone from one week to the next, sitting in his house with a woman he had pulled from a river just hours ago, discussing her undergarments and clothing needs. If someone had told him this morning how his day would unfold, he would have thought they were crazy. "You are a good man, Arthur Quinn," Diana said when their laughter subsided. "I owe you my life. I will never be able to repay that debt." "You owe me nothing," Arthur said firmly. "Any decent person would have done the same." "Perhaps," Diana said, "but you were the one who was there. You were the one who risked your life to save mine. That means something." Arthur shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct praise. Well, I am just glad I was nearby. Deanna stifled a yawn, and Arthur noticed the dark circles under her eyes. You should rest, he said. You can take my bed. I will sleep out here by the fire. I could not possibly take your bed, Deanna protested. You have already done so much. I insist, Arthur said in a tone that brooked no argument. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You need proper rest. Deanna looked like she wanted to argue further but was too tired to manage it. She nodded and let Arthur lead her to his bedroom. It was a simple room with a large bed covered in a quilt his mother had made, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a chest of drawers. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, painting everything in golden light. I will wake you for supper, Arthur said. Sleep as long as you need. Thank you, Deanna said, sitting on the edge of the bed. For everything. Arthur nodded and retreated, closing the door gently behind him. He stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the creak of the bed as Deanna settled herself, then returned to the main room. The house felt different now, charged with a presence that had been missing for so long. Arthur moved through his afternoon chores in a daze, his thoughts constantly returning to the woman sleeping in his bed. He told himself it was only natural to be preoccupied, that having a stranger in his home was bound to be disorienting. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was something about Deanna Oakes that had gotten under his skin from the moment he pulled her from the river. The way she had looked at him with those green eyes, the sound of her laugh, the graceful way she moved even exhausted and wearing clothes 3 sizes too large. Arthur had thought himself content with his solitary life, but now he found himself questioning that assumption. He went outside to tend to the horses and check on the cattle in the near pasture. The familiar work helped clear his head somewhat, though he caught himself hurrying through tasks so he could get back to the house. What if Deanna woke and needed something? What if she was frightened, waking in a strange place by the time Arthur finished his chores? The sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink. He paused on his way back to the house to appreciate the view, something he did most evenings. But tonight, he found himself eager to get inside to check on Deanna and see if she was awake yet. She was, standing in the main room looking refreshed if still tired. She had braided her hair, still slightly damp, over one shoulder, and Arthur thought she had never looked more beautiful. I hope I did not sleep too long, she said. I meant to only rest for an hour or two. You needed the sleep, Arthur said. Are you hungry? I can warm up the rest of the stew. That would be wonderful, Deanna said. She moved to help him, and they worked together in the small kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Deanna sliced bread from the loaf Arthur had baked 2 days ago while he heated the stew, and soon they were seated at his small table, eating by lamplight. Tell me about your brother, Arthur said. What kind of claim does he have? Silver, Deanna said. At least he thinks it is silver. Daniel has always been a dreamer, chasing one scheme or another, but this time he seems convinced he has found something real. He sent me a sample and I had it assayed in Boston. The assayer confirmed it was silver ore, good quality. Boston, Arthur said. You came all the way from Boston, Deanna nodded. I was working as a teacher there, but after our parents died last year, Daniel and I are all each other has left. When he asked me to come help him work the claim, I could not refuse. He is my brother. That is a long journey to make alone, Arthur observed. Why did he not come to escort you? He could not leave the claim, Deanna explained. There have been problems with claim jumpers in the area. If he left for the months it would take to travel to Boston and back, he would likely return to find someone else had taken over his site. Arthur frowned. The mining camps can be rough places. Are you sure you want to live in such conditions? I am stronger than I look, Deanna said with a smile. And Daniel needs me. Besides, what do I have waiting for me in Boston? A small room in a boarding house and a job teaching children whose parents care more about social standing than education. At least in Montana, I will have family and the chance to build something of my own. There was a determination in her voice that Arthur admired. She was not some delicate flower who would wilt at the first sign of hardship. She had crossed the country alone, survived a near drowning, and was ready to start over with nothing but her brother and a dream. That took courage. Still, Arthur said carefully, you should know what you are getting into. Mining camps attract all sorts and not all of them are friendly to women. You will need to be careful. I appreciate your concern, Deanna said, but I am not naive. I know there will be challenges. I am prepared to face them. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their lives and families. Arthur found himself opening up in ways he rarely did, telling Deanna about his parents and the ranch, his dreams of building a real cattle empire in Montana. Deanna spoke of her childhood in Boston, her work as a teacher, the grief of losing her parents to influenza within days of each other. By the time they finally said goodnight, Arthur felt like he had known Deanna for years rather than hours. There was an ease between them that seemed to defy the short time of their acquaintance. As he settled himself on the sofa with a blanket, listening to Deanna move around in his bedroom preparing for sleep, Arthur wondered if this was what it felt like to truly connect with another person. He woke early, as was his habit, and found Deanna already up and trying to figure out his stove to make coffee. She looked adorably frustrated, her hair mussed from sleep and his oversized shirt slipping off one shoulder. "Let me," Arthur said, trying not to laugh at her expression of relief. "This stove can be tricky if you do not know its moods." "I am usually quite good with stoves," Deanna said defensively, "but this one seems determined to thwart me." "It just takes practice," Arthur said, quickly getting the fire going and the coffee pot on to brew. "My mother used to say this stove had a personality all its own." They shared breakfast. Then Arthur saddled his horse for the ride to Challies. Before he left, he took Deanna's measurements, trying to maintain a professional demeanor even as his face heated at the intimacy of the task. Deanna recited numbers while he wrote them down, and they discussed what she would need in terms of clothing and supplies. "I have some money," Deanna said. "It was in a small purse in my pocket. The river did not take everything." "Save your money," Arthur said. "You will need it for your brother's claim. Consider this a loan if it makes you feel better, to be repaid when you are settled." Deanna looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Arthur's expression stopped her. "Very well, but I will repay you every cent." The ride to Challies took Arthur a little over 2 hours. The town was small but growing, situated at the confluence of the Salmon River and Challies Creek in Custer County, Idaho Territory. Arthur corrected his mental geography, realizing his ranch was actually just across the border in Montana Territory, close enough to Challies that it was his nearest town for supplies. He sent the telegram to Diana's brother first, keeping the message brief but informative. Then he headed to the general store, where Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, helped him select appropriate clothing for a woman of Diana's size and station. The older woman's eyes gleamed with curiosity, but Arthur deflected her questions with vague answers about a stranded traveler. By the time he finished his shopping and started the ride home, the sun was past its zenith. He had purchased 2 dresses, one practical calico for everyday wear and one nicer wool for church or town visits, along with undergarments, stockings, a warm shawl, sturdy boots, and various other necessities. He had also picked up fabric and a sewing kit, figuring Deanna might want to make additional clothes herself. Arthur found himself eager to return home in a way that had nothing to do with his usual attachment to the ranch. He wanted to see Deanna's face when he gave her the clothes, wanted to hear her voice and see her smile. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. Diana was hanging laundry when he rode up, his clothes from yesterday that she had washed and was now drying in the warm afternoon sun. She waved when she saw him, and Arthur's heart did that odd flip again. "You were gone so long, I was starting to worry," Deanna called as he dismounted. "Challies is a good ride from here," Arthur said, untying the packages from his saddle. "But I think I got everything you need." Deanna's eyes widened as she took in the parcels. "Arthur, this is too much. Just open them," he said, unable to keep the smile from his face. They went inside, and Diana unwrapped each package with exclamations of delight. "The dresses fit well, Mrs. Patterson's expert eye having served Arthur well." Deanna held up the nicer wool dress, a deep blue that Arthur thought would match her eyes beautifully, and he saw tears shine in those eyes. "I cannot accept all this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is too generous." "You needed clothes," Arthur said simply, "and I needed to go to town anyway. It was no trouble." Deanna set down the dress and crossed to where Arthur stood. Before he could react, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are the kindest man I have ever met." Arthur stood frozen, his cheek burning where her lips had touched. Deanna pulled back, looking almost as surprised by her action as he felt. They stared at each other for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. "I should try these on," Deanna said finally, breaking the spell. "Make sure everything fits properly." "Of course," Arthur managed, his voice rougher than usual. "I will be outside if you need anything." He fled to the barn, his heart racing. This was ridiculous. He was a grown man of 27, not some green boy to be undone by a simple kiss on the cheek. But there had been nothing simple about it. In that brief moment of contact, Arthur had felt something shift inside him, something he had thought long dead coming back to life. He busied himself with unnecessary tasks, grooming horses that did not need grooming and organizing tack that was already organized. By the time he returned to the house, he had himself mostly under control. Deanna emerged from the bedroom wearing the calico dress, and Arthur's careful control nearly shattered. The dress fit her perfectly, highlighting her figure while remaining entirely proper. She had pinned up her hair in a simple style, and the overall effect was stunning. "Well?" she asked, turning in a circle. "Will I pass muster in polite society?" "You look beautiful," Arthur said before he could stop himself. Deanna blushed, a pretty pink staining her cheeks. "Thank you. It has been so long since I wore anything but traveling clothes or borrowed shirts. I had forgotten what it feels like to wear a proper dress." They fell into a routine over the next few days. Arthur would rise early and do his morning chores, then return to find Diana had made breakfast. They would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. Then Arthur would head out to work the ranch while Deanna kept herself busy with household tasks. She proved to be an excellent cook, far better than Arthur, and began experimenting with his limited pantry to create meals that were both delicious and inventive. She also took over the vegetable garden his mother had planted years ago, and that Arthur had let go to seed, spending hours weeding and replanting, coaxing new life from the neglected soil. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading from the small collection of books Arthur's parents had left behind. Diana had a beautiful voice when she read aloud, and Arthur found himself looking forward to those quiet hours more than anything else in his day. A week passed, then two. A response came from Diana's brother, saying he would come to Challies to meet her in a month's time, as he could not leave the claim any sooner. Diana showed Arthur the telegram, and he tried to ignore the sinking feeling in his stomach. A month was not long, not nearly long enough. "I hope I am not overstaying my welcome," Diana said, watching his face. "I could try to travel to the claim on my own if you need me to leave sooner." "No," Arthur said quickly. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need. I like having you here." The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Diana's expression softened. "I like being here. You have made me feel so welcome, Arthur. I have not felt this much at home anywhere since my parents died." Something shifted between them after that conversation. The air seemed charged with possibility, heavy with things unsaid. Arthur found himself looking for excuses to be near Diana, to brush against her hand or stand close enough to smell the lavender soap she used. And Diana seemed to be doing the same, finding reasons to touch his arm or lean close to show him something. One evening, about 3 weeks into Diana's stay, they were washing dishes together after supper. Arthur was drying while Diana washed, and their hands touched in the sudsy water. Instead of pulling away, Diana let her hand linger against his. Arthur set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "Diana," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" she asked, those green eyes searching his face. "I do not want you to go," he said simply. "These past weeks with you here have been the happiest I can remember. The thought of you leaving, of going back to being alone, it makes me feel hollow inside." Diana dried her hands on a towel, taking her time, her expression thoughtful. "I do not want to go either," she admitted softly. "But my brother is expecting me. He needs my help with the claim." "I know," Arthur said. "And I would never ask you to abandon your family. But maybe, after you see your brother, after you make sure he is settled, you could come back. You could stay here with me, if you wanted." "Arthur," Diana breathed, stepping closer to him. "Are you asking what I think you are asking? I am asking if you might consider making a life here," Arthur said, his courage growing. "With me, as my wife." Diana's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "We have only known each other for 3 weeks." "I know," Arthur said. "And if you think I am crazy, just say so and we will forget I ever mentioned it. But I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You have brought light and life back to this ranch, to my life. I love you, Diana. I think I have loved you since I pulled you from that river." Tears spilled down Diana's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too," she whispered. "I thought I was insane for falling so fast, but I could not help it. You are good and kind, and you make me feel safe and cherished. Yes, Arthur. Yes, I will marry you." Arthur pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She fit perfectly, like she had been made to be there. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, to marvel at the joy and love he saw reflected in her eyes. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Please," Diana said, and Arthur lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people discovering each other. But it quickly deepened as weeks of suppressed longing found release. Diana's arms wrapped around Arthur's neck, and he lifted her slightly, reveling in her soft gasp of surprise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should do this properly," Arthur said, resting his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you before you go to your brother. That way, when you explain the situation, you will be a married woman with a home and husband to return to." "That sounds perfect," Diana said, "but we should still visit Daniel. I need to see for myself that he is well and that his claim is legitimate. And he deserves to know I have found happiness." "Of course," Arthur agreed. "We will go together, make it a wedding trip of sorts." They made plans late into the night, giddy with happiness and possibility. Arthur suggested they marry in chalets, small ceremony with whatever witnesses they could find, then travel to Daniel's claim in the mountains. Deanna agreed, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. The next morning, Arthur woke filled with purpose. He had morning chores to complete, but then he would ride to Challies to make arrangements. He needed to speak to the circuit judge who passed through monthly, see if he could perform the ceremony. He needed to let the few neighbors he had know about the wedding, make this real and official. Deanna was already awake when he emerged from his makeshift bed on the sofa, humming as she made breakfast. She smiled when she saw him, a smile so full of love it made Arthur's chest ache. "Good morning," she said, crossing to kiss him. Arthur marveled at the simple intimacy of it, how natural it felt to greet her this way. "I have been thinking about the wedding. I want to make you a proper shirt to wear, something special." "You do not have to go to such trouble," Arthur protested, but Deanna shook her head. "I want to. Let me do this for you, Arthur. Let me make this day as special as I can." How could he argue with that? He nodded, and Deanna beamed, already planning in her mind what she would create. The next week was a flurry of activity. Arthur made the ride to Challies and found that the circuit judge would be through in 10 days. Perfect timing. He spread word of the upcoming wedding to his scattered neighbors, receiving surprised but genuine congratulations. The few ranchers and their wives who lived within riding distance all promised to attend, curious to meet the woman who had captured Arthur Quinn's heart. Meanwhile, Deanna threw herself into preparations. She sewed Arthur a shirt from fabric she found in his mother's old trunk, white cotton with careful stitching. She also worked on altering the blue wool dress to make it more suitable for a wedding. Adding lace trim she made herself from thread she unraveled from one of Arthur's old shirts he had said he would use for rags. The evening before the wedding they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Arthur held Deanna's hand, marveling at how much his life had changed in just a month. "Are you nervous?" Deanna asked. "About marrying you?" "Not even a little," Arthur said. "About having people at the ranch tomorrow?" "Slightly. I am not used to entertaining." Deanna laughed. "We are not entertaining. We are getting married. The guests will understand if everything is not perfect. As long as you are there, everything will be perfect," Arthur said, and was rewarded with one of Deanna's brilliant smiles. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the Montana sky a perfect blue unmarred by clouds. Arthur dressed in his new shirt and his best trousers, polished his boots until they shone, and tried to tame his hair with water and pomade. The result was acceptable if not quite civilized, but Deanna said he looked handsome, and that was all that mattered. Their neighbors began arriving around noon, and Arthur was surprised by how many came. The Hendersons from 10 miles south, the Pratts from 15 miles west, even old McCready from the next valley over made the journey. Each brought food or small gifts, and soon the house was full of life and laughter. The circuit judge arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, a portly man named Judge Winters who had been riding this circuit for 20 years. He shook Arthur's hand and complimented Deanna on her beauty, then got down to business. They stood in Arthur's main room, surrounded by friends and neighbors, and spoke their vows. Arthur's voice shook slightly as he promised to love and cherish Deanna for all his days, but his conviction was absolute. Deanna's voice was clear and strong, her eyes locked on his as she made her own promises. When Judge Winters pronounced them husband and wife, Arthur pulled Deanna into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and whistles of their guests. In that moment, Arthur felt his heart might burst from happiness. The celebration lasted into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the yard. Arthur was not much of a dancer, but he held Diana in his arms and swayed to the fiddle music old Macready coaxed from his battered instrument, and it felt like flying. As the sun set and their guests began to depart, each couple offering congratulations and best wishes, Arthur stood with his arm around Diana and thought about how different this day would have been if he had not heard her scream that morning weeks ago. How different his entire life would have been. "What are you thinking?" Diana asked, leaning into his side. "That I am the luckiest man in Montana," Arthur said, "maybe in the whole territory." "I am pretty lucky myself," Diana said. "Not everyone nearly drowns and ends up finding true love as a result." They laughed together, watching the last of their guests disappear into the twilight. Then Arthur swept Diana into his arms, making her squeal in surprise, and carried her across the threshold of their home. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Arthur had been with women before, quick encounters that left him feeling empty, but this was different. With Diana, every touch meant something, every kiss was a promise. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with whispered words of love and awe. Afterward, Diana lay in Arthur's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I love you," she murmured sleepily. "I know I have said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you so much, Arthur Quinn." "I love you too," Arthur said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They spent 3 blissful days as newlyweds before beginning preparations for the trip to visit Diana's brother. Arthur wanted to bring supplies, both for the journey and as gifts for Daniel, and Diana needed to prepare food that would travel well. They worked together, falling into the rhythms of partnership that felt both new and ancient. The journey to Daniel's claim took 4 days of hard riding through mountain passes and steep valleys. They traveled on horseback, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Diana proved to be an excellent rider, handling her horse with confidence even on difficult terrain. She had changed into more practical traveling clothes, and Arthur thought she looked just as beautiful in worn canvas and leather as she had in her wedding dress. They camped under the stars each night, and Arthur taught Diana how to read the constellations his father had shown him as a boy. She would lie with her head on his shoulder, pointing at the sky and asking questions, and Arthur would answer, marveling at how she made even the familiar seem new and wondrous. Daniel's claim was situated in a narrow valley high in the mountains, accessible only by a rough trail that made Arthur grateful for his sure-footed horses. They arrived in late afternoon to find a small camp with a tent, a fire pit, and various mining equipment scattered around. A man emerged from the tent at the sound of their approach, and Arthur got his first look at Daniel Oakes. He was younger than Arthur had expected, maybe 22 or 23, with the same green eyes as his sister but a leaner build. His face lit up when he saw Diana. "Diana!" he shouted, running to help her dismount. "Thank God you are all right. Your telegram said you had an accident but were safe. I have been worried sick." "I am fine, Danny," Diana said, using what Arthur assumed was a childhood nickname. "More than fine, actually. I have so much to tell you." Daniel noticed Arthur for the first time, his expression becoming wary. "Who is this?" "This is Arthur Quinn," Diana said, her voice full of pride. "My husband." Daniel's jaw dropped. "You're what?" The explanation took some time, with Diana recounting the story of her near drowning, her rescue, and their subsequent courtship and marriage. Arthur let her tell it, adding details here and there when asked. Daniel listened with expressions that ranged from shock to concern to, finally, acceptance. "So you married my sister after knowing her for less than a month," Daniel said to Arthur, his tone making it clear he was not entirely pleased. "I did," Arthur said calmly, "and I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets it. I love your sister, Daniel. She is the best thing that ever happened to me." Daniel studied Arthur for a long moment, then turned to Deanna. "Are you happy?" "Incredibly happy," Deanna said, taking Arthur's hand. "Danny, I know this seems sudden, but Arthur is a good man. He saved my life and gave me a home. But more than that, he loves me and respects me. He makes me laugh and feel safe. I could not ask for more." Something in Daniel's expression softened. "Well, if you are happy, that is what matters, though I have to admit I am disappointed. I was looking forward to having you here to help with the claim." "We can still help," Deanna said. "Arthur and I discussed it. We can stay for a few weeks, help you get established, and maybe we can arrange for you to visit us at the ranch during the winter months when mining is impossible." "You would do that?" Daniel asked, looking at Arthur. "You are family now," Arthur said. "Of course we would." They set up camp near Daniel's tent, and over the next few days, Arthur helped Daniel with the mining operation while Deanna organized the camp and prepared meals. Arthur had to admit, Daniel seemed to know what he was doing. The silver vein he had found was real and potentially lucrative, though it would take hard work to extract enough ore to make a real profit. In the evenings, the three of them would sit around the fire, and Arthur got to know his new brother-in-law. Daniel was enthusiastic and optimistic, full of dreams about what he would do with his silver fortune. Arthur tempered some of his more unrealistic expectations with practical advice, and Deanna mediated when the two men disagreed. Despite the rough conditions and hard work, Arthur found himself enjoying the trip. He liked Daniel, liked seeing Deanna with her brother, seeing the bond between them. And every night, he got to fall asleep with his wife in his arms, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of owls. After 2 weeks, they prepared to return to the ranch. Daniel was reluctant to see them go but understood they had their own lives to live. He extracted a promise from Diana to write regularly and from Arthur to take good care of his sister, which Arthur readily gave. "You are always welcome at the ranch," Arthur told Daniel as they prepared to leave. "Consider it a second home." "Thank you," Daniel said, shaking Arthur's hand. "For everything. For saving Deanna, for making her happy, for helping me here. I could not have asked for a better brother." The words touched Arthur more deeply than he expected. He had been alone for so long that the idea of having family again, of being part of something larger than himself, was almost overwhelming. The journey back to the ranch seemed shorter, perhaps because Arthur was eager to get home. They pushed a bit harder each day, making the trip in 3 days instead of 4. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the ranch spread out below them, Arthur felt a surge of pride and joy. "Home," Deanna said softly, and Arthur loved that she called it that. They settled into married life with ease. Deanna proved to be an excellent partner in running the ranch, keeping the books and managing the household while Arthur handled the livestock and maintenance. But she also surprised him by wanting to learn ranch work, asking to help with cattle drives and branding, insisting on learning to rope and ride like a proper ranch hand. Arthur taught her everything she wanted to know, patient when she struggled and proud when she succeeded. Watching Deanna learn to throw a lasso or cut a calf from the herd filled him with admiration for her determination and courage. Their first winter together was cold but cozy, with long evenings spent by the fire and early mornings helping calves survive the brutal Montana temperatures. Daniel came to visit in January as planned, staying for 2 weeks and helping with the winter work. Arthur enjoyed having him there, the male companionship a welcome change even as he treasured his time alone with Deanna. Spring came, and with it the hard work of calving season. Arthur and Deanna barely slept for weeks, taking turns checking on laboring cows and helping difficult births. It was exhausting work, but doing it together made it bearable, even joyful in moments. One evening in late April, Deanna came to Arthur with news that made his heart stop. "I am with child," she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Arthur stared at her for a moment, processing the words. Then he let out a whoop of joy and lifted her in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Deanna, we are having a baby." "Are you happy?" Deanna asked, though the answer was obvious from his reaction. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Arthur said, setting her down gently. "You have given me everything, Deanna. A home, a family, a reason to wake up smiling every morning, and now a child. I feel like the richest man alive." Diana's pregnancy was relatively easy, though she chafed at Arthur's insistence that she rest more and work less. They compromised, with Diana continuing to do lighter chores but leaving the heavy ranch work to Arthur and the hands he had hired as the ranch grew. Daniel visited in July and was overjoyed at the news he was going to be an uncle. His claim was doing well enough that he had hired 2 men to help him work it. He brought gifts for the baby and a generous amount of silver ore to be sold on Deanna's behalf. "I could not have done any of this without you both," Daniel said. "The money from selling this should set up a nice nest egg for my niece or nephew." Diana cried and hugged her brother, thanking him through her tears. Arthur shook Daniel's hand, moved by his generosity. The baby came in early December, during a snowstorm that made it impossible to fetch the doctor from Challies. Arthur delivered his own son with the help of Mrs. Henderson, who rode through the storm when Arthur sent a desperate message. It was the most terrifying and amazing experience of his life, holding his newborn son and watching Diana cradle the child with tears of joy streaming down her face. They named him Samuel, after Arthur's father, with Daniel as his middle name to honor Deanna's brother. Samuel was a healthy baby with a strong cry and his mother's green eyes, and Arthur fell completely in love the moment he held him. Fatherhood suited Arthur. He loved everything about it, from the midnight feedings to the endless diaper changes to the way Samuel would grab his finger with surprising strength. Deanna blossomed as a mother, patient and loving, finding reserves of strength Arthur had not known she possessed. The ranch continued to thrive. Arthur's herd grew, and he became known throughout the territory for his quality cattle. He hired more hands, built a new barn, and added onto the house to make room for their growing family. Because Samuel was not their only child. 2 years after Samuel came Emma, a beautiful baby girl with her father's dark hair and serious expression. Then, 3 years later, twin boys they named James and Michael, who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and mischief. Through it all, Arthur and Deanna's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, the inevitable friction of 2 strong-willed people building a life together. But they always talked through their problems, always went to bed as friends and lovers, always remembered how lucky they were to have found each other. Daniel became a regular visitor, especially after he sold his claim for a substantial sum and moved to Challies to open a mining equipment business. He never married, claiming no woman could compare to the example Arthur and Deanna set, though Arthur suspected he simply had not found the right person yet. The years passed in a blur of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Arthur taught his sons to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals they raised. Deanna taught their daughter to read and write, to stand up for herself, to be strong and kind in equal measure. And together, they built something lasting, a legacy of love and hard work. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Arthur and Deanna stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel, now 9, was teaching 7-year-old Emma to rope a fence post while the 5-year-old twins tumbled in the grass like puppies. "Do you ever think about that day?" Deanna asked, leaning against Arthur's shoulder. "The day you pulled me from the river." "Every day," Arthur admitted. "I think about how easily I might have missed hearing your scream, might have been checking fence lines in a different section. How my whole life would be different if I had been 5 minutes later." "I think about it too," Deanna said. "I think about how I almost did not make this trip, how I almost stayed in Boston where it was safe and familiar. I could have missed all of this, missed you, missed our children and this beautiful life we have built." Arthur pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am grateful every day that you are here, that you chose me, that you built this life with me. You saved me just as much as I saved you that day, Deanna. You saved me from loneliness and emptiness. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," Deanna corrected gently. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our fears and doubts. It makes us better than we ever could have been alone." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Arthur held his wife and watched their children and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what happiness looked like, he thought. This was what it meant to live a full life. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Samuel showed an aptitude for ranching that filled Arthur with pride, often joining his father on cattle drives and helping make decisions about the herd. Emma proved to be brilliant with numbers and began keeping the ranch books when she was just 12, finding inefficiencies and suggesting improvements that increased their profits. The twins were wild and creative, always getting into trouble but also bringing laughter and energy to everything they did. James wanted to be a veterinarian, spending hours watching Arthur tend to sick animals and asking endless questions. Michael was the artist, drawing everything he saw and showing a talent that Deanna encouraged by ordering art supplies from catalogs. Daniel finally married when he was 35, choosing a widow named Sarah who ran the boarding house in Challies. They had 2 children of their own, and the cousins grew up close, spending summers at each other's homes. Arthur built a guest house on the ranch to accommodate the growing extended family. Through it all, Arthur and Deanna remained each other's anchor. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands while watching sunsets, still looked at each other with the same love and wonder they had felt as newlyweds. The passion between them never faded, tempered now with the deep intimacy of 2 people who knew each other completely. On their 20th anniversary, the children planned a surprise party, inviting neighbors and friends from across the territory. Arthur and Deanna were genuinely shocked when they returned from a ride to find their yard full of people. A banner strung across the porch proclaiming 20 years of love. There were speeches and toasts, food and music and dancing. Samuel, now 19 and nearly as tall as his father, raised a glass to his parents and spoke of the example they set, the love they showed not just to each other but to everyone around them. Arthur found himself getting emotional as his son spoke, Diana's hand tight in his. 20 years ago, my father saved my mother from drowning, Samuel said. But really, they saved each other. They built something beautiful together, something lasting. They showed us what love looks like, what commitment means. Happy anniversary, Ma and Pa. May you have 20 more years and then 20 beyond that. The crowd cheered, and Arthur pulled Deanna into his arms and kissed her like they were young again, like it was their wedding day and the future stretched bright and endless before them. The children eventually moved on to their own lives and adventures. Samuel took over running the ranch, partnering with Arthur but gradually assuming more responsibility. He married a local girl named Margaret, and they built a house on the northern section of the ranch property. Their first child, a boy they named Arthur, made Deanna and Arthur grandparents for the first time. Emma went to Denver to study mathematics, shocking everyone by excelling at the university there. She came home with a degree and a husband, a professor of economics who Deanna approved of, and Arthur eventually grew to like. They settled in Challies, where Emma opened a financial services firm that became quite successful. The twins both left Montana, James to study veterinary medicine in California and Michael to apprentice with an artist in New York. But they came home for holidays and summers, regaling the family with stories of their adventures. As Arthur entered his 50s, he began to slow down, letting Samuel handle more of the day-to-day ranching operations. He and Deanna spent more time traveling, visiting their far-flung children and seeing parts of the country they had only read about. But they always came home to Montana, to the ranch that had been the foundation of their life together. On a crisp autumn morning, 30 years after Arthur had pulled Deanna from the Snake River, they rode out together to the spot where it had happened. The river still flowed swift and cold, the banks green with grass and wildflowers. They dismounted and stood hand in hand, looking at the water. "I still have nightmares sometimes," Deanna admitted. "About drowning, about the cold and the fear. But in the dreams, you are always there, pulling me out, saving me." "You are the one who saved me," Arthur said, turning to face her. "I was drowning too, just in a different way. Drowning in loneliness and routine, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love, to be happy." Deanna reached up and cupped his face, her hands showing the wear of 30 years of ranch work, but still gentle and sure. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best," Arthur agreed. "I would not change a single moment." They stood there for a long time, remembering, grateful for the chance encounter that had changed everything. Then they mounted their horses and rode home together, the way they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times again, God willing. The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, growing into one of the largest and most successful operations in Montana. Arthur's grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren grew up running through the same fields Arthur had played in as a child, swimming in the same creeks, learning the same lessons about hard work and integrity. Deanna remained Arthur's constant companion through everything. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a testament to the love that had started with a rescue and grown into something magnificent. When Arthur was 73, he fell ill with pneumonia. Deanna nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave even when the children begged her to rest. Arthur recovered, weaker than before but still fighting, still determined to spend as many years with Deanna as possible. "You are not getting rid of me that easily," he told her when he could finally sit up and eat solid food again. "I promised you forever, and I meant it." "Good," Deanna said, tears of relief streaming down her face, "because I am not done with you yet." They had 5 more good years together, years of watching their family grow and thrive, years of quiet contentment and deep love. Arthur's health was fragile, but his spirit remained strong, kept alive by Deanna's love and the life they had built together. One spring morning, Arthur did not wake up. Deanna found him peaceful in their bed, a slight smile on his face, gone in his sleep without pain or fear. She held his hand and cried, grieving the loss of her husband, her partner, the love of her life. But even through her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear, every sunrise watched together, and every challenge overcome. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Arthur and Diana had touched over the years. Samuel delivered the eulogy, speaking of his father's kindness and integrity, his love for his family and his land. He spoke of the day Arthur saved Diana from drowning and how that single act of courage had created a legacy that would last for generations. Diana stood at the graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them there because Arthur had heard a scream one spring morning and acted without hesitation. She placed a single white rose on his casket and whispered a final goodbye to the man who had been her everything. She lived 3 more years, remaining active and involved with the ranch and family. She delighted in her great-great-grandchildren, told stories of the early days to anyone who would listen, kept Arthur's memory alive with every word and action. But everyone could see she was fading, that part of her had died with Arthur. On a quiet summer evening, Diana passed away in her sleep, in the same bed where Arthur had died, in the house they had built together so many years ago. The family found her with a letter clutched in her hand, a letter Arthur had written her on their 50th anniversary, telling her how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every day they had shared. They buried her next to Arthur on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a tree they had planted together on their 10th anniversary. The headstones were simple, listing their names and the years they lived, but also the words that Samuel had chosen. Together in life, together in death, forever in love. The ranch remained in the Quinn family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Arthur and Diana had laid. The tale of how Arthur saved Diana from drowning became family legend, told and retold, embellished and celebrated, a reminder that love can spring from the most unexpected moments, that courage and kindness can change the course of a life, of many lives. And sometimes, on quiet spring mornings, when the light hits the ranch house just right and the Snake River runs swift and cold in the distance, the current generation of Quinn swears they can see 2 figures on horseback, riding together across the Montana grasslands, eternal and inseparable, a testament to a love that saved 2 lonely souls and built something that would last forever.